full of great, barrel-aged whiskey, if that even made it out to Montana without getting raided.
How should a modern craft distiller like yours think about redundancy today?
One thing happens, guess what? You can't bottle it.
Welcome to Montana Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom.
Well, I'm betting in love. I've been on the ground, but gotten back on my feet. Just fall back down on my knees for you and your whiskey under the bridge.
Welcome to the Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom Show. We're going to jump right into things. The topic of our show is strategic redundancy, and the title is What Prohibition Teaches About Survival. So the opening for this show is in the show, along with two other consecutive episodes. We'll be breaking down a concept that shows up everywhere, from whiskey to wealth, to freedom itself, and that's the idea of strategic redundancy. So by definition, strategic redundancy is the deliberate creation of multiple independent pathways to the same outcome designed to eliminate single points of failure and produce one core result, which is security.
Yeah.
Security is the emotion, basically, that is evoked around strategic redundancy, but it isn't the end goal. It's the foundation that makes freedom real.
Before we get into this, if you're about building control in your financial life, not just participating in it, make sure you subscribe.
So we're going to do our quick intros. As a part of the intros, I'm going to ask you guys to answer this question. I'm going to introduce you, and then after I introduce you, then you can answer this question for me. Do you see redundancy as a defensive safety net or an offensive strategy for gaining advantage? Defensive or offensive? Safety net or advantage? So I'll start with Karen on my left here. Karen as a certified liability advisor and mortgage professional with CMG Home Loans. How would you answer that question?
I would say offensive, because ultimately that the best defense is the best offense.
So as an offensive strategy for gaining an advantage, to have redundancy in your life. Across the table for me is a return guest, Willie Blazer, founder and CEO of Willie's Distillery. Once again, Willie, thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Super appreciate your participation. And how would you answer the question?
Yeah, initially I was going to say both, because I think you've got to have both, offense and defense, in the game. And, sometimes I kind of fall back on, some of the stuff I learned in the military. Redundancy, it's going to help you whether you're pushing forward, going, towards the mission, or, hey, we're in defense mode right now. So I don't know. I think it plays on both of them. Kind of have your backup plan, but then also have your plan as far as moving forward too.
I did kind of anticipate you'd say both, but I was curious from a military standpoint, because I think that's sort of the origin of the concept strategic redundancy in the first place is a military term, true?
Probably so. Yeah.
Didn't it evolve from the premise of two is one and one is none?
Yeah, probably so. And that's, it depends on which military you go back in history and look at. I think the Germans or Nazis, or I can't, recall all this perfectly, but it was something about, they were talking about, we don't know how to fight the Americans, the U.S., because it's just chaos, and they're good at organized chaos. We don't, we can't plan for them.
That's great.
Come at it every angle and for every way, shape, or form.
Back in the day, you had all these kind of rules of warfare. You kind of suspected what this side was going to do, or this and that. And I think it was a quote like in World War II, but about the Americans, were just very, very good at chaos, and they're chaotic, and we can't plan for that. How do we defeat these guys?
Love it.
Came a long ways from back in the day when the armies used to march on the field together and point muskets straight across the field at each other and just open fire, right? Like that was always crazy. So Adam Wright, I should introduce you. Adam Wright, you were also a returning guest. Thank you for coming back again, your second trip into the studio. You have started a new venture, more or less new. I guess it's not really totally new. Pulse Marketing out of Livingston, and you serve it's a national company, so you can do business for anybody anywhere.
Yes, sir.
We're going to touch more on your business, and the one thing that's kind of cool, just so the audience knows, is I'm teasing right now. I'm going to tease a promo for a new community member promotion. Yeah, that's gonna come up in one of the next episodes. How would you answer the question? Do you see redundancy as a defensive safety net or an offensive strategy for gaining advantage?
So I guess I'll bring this somewhat to the introduction. This business is somewhat of it's a rebirth of a business I've been doing for 18 years. And so I guess my answer to the question is it depends on what phase of business you're in. If you're, let's say, rebirth or a startup, I would say it's very much an offensive move. You're trying to separate yourself from your competition. That might be if they're failing in a certain spot and you can continue to succeed where they're falling off, when you can gain market share further along in your business, when you might be flip side and somebody's young new person trying to take away from your business, then it's a defensive move to make sure that they're failing when you're staying steady.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so jumping into the promoted products from Willie's Distillery for this quarter, we have in the 3 bottles in the center, we've got the Cattle Dog Canadian whiskey, and we've got the Green Truck Gin and the Huckleberry Vodka.
Yep.
It's got a name to it, doesn't it?
Snowcrest.
Snowcrest, yeah. Sorry.
But we call it Huckleberry Vodka.
Yeah. So, and we're gonna get into more depth around all 3 of those products in the next episode. But what I wanted to do with this specific episode, just as sort of an introduction around the whiskey and gin combination, as part of the supporting cast, if you will, of the topic of the show, which is strategic redundancy. So, during Prohibition, what role did redundancy, like producing both whiskey and gin, play in survival during the Prohibition era?
Yeah, I think a lot of it during Prohibition was, America was cut off from, making alcohol in general or importing, bringing it in from Scotland or Mexico or specifically Canada. So it was, we were a dry nation for quite a few years. I think they might have allowed a couple breweries, maybe one distillery to keep going. I don't know exactly. I can't remember exactly how that worked, but essentially we were dry. So of course it's all illegal stuff. It's all bootleg, moonshine type stuff. So what it turned into during that time frame, you didn't have like your super, super high end whiskeys and barrel aged for a long time. Americans were just whatever they can get their hands on. So like your moonshines and your easier to make gins, that's how bathtub gin, that moniker came about. So anything that was fairly easy to make was probably what was sold and bootlegged. And even the Canadian whiskeys, started maybe getting watered down because Americans started drinking a lot of the Canadian whiskey because that was the easiest thing to bootleg across the border, and a lot of cool Montana history with bootlegging, But you had Al Capone and all that stuff in Chicago, and a lot of stuff was coming down through Montana and Minnesota and wherever the border states were. So even the Canadian whiskey, they had don't quote me on this, but their 10-year-old stuff, their 12-year-old stuff, they're real good stuff. And they're like, hey, these Americans are drinking all this, so they'd start adding, water to it or like grain neutral spirits or clear moonshine to it to kind of, thin it out. The alcohol content was still there, but it wasn't quite as robust or flavorful. So I think that's some part of where today you kind of get that Canadian whiskey flavor.
But they were able to. Canada was able to keep making it. They weren't shut down from production, right?
No, they weren't. But we probably drank all of their barrel warehouses dry pretty quickly. So like, all right, how are we going to keep up with this?
Gotcha.
Demand went too high for supply.
So we're going to make
expecting.
this kind of cheaper, easier stuff and blend it with our whiskeys.
Blend it out.
Yeah. And they knew that people were drinking stuff out of their bathtubs, so
So
they were
it
like,
all tasted good.
their standards have definitely gone down. So
yeah, and it's just like I've always said, a lot of people don't think of like moonshine history, out here in the in the West. Anywhere there was gold mining camps, 1840s, 50s in California, 1860s here in Montana, Virginia City, wherever, there was somebody there making a rudimentary moonshine, guaranteed, because you can imagine bringing something from Jack Daniels or wherever else back east, Kentucky or Tennessee, a wagon train full of great, barrel-aged whiskey, if that even made it out to Montana without getting raided, you can imagine what that would have cost out here. So somebody was making some cheaper stuff. I'm not saying it was bad, but it probably wasn't as good as, some of the other stuff back east, but somebody was making it, and it served its purpose of getting people drunk or whatever when they're done with work, or maybe when they were working. I don't know. They're probably looking for gold as they were drinking.
Yeah, it's supposed to be whistle while you work, but I guess it's drink while you dig. Adam, did you have anything you wanted to contribute to that as far as the Prohibition story and whiskey in relation to gin?
Well, I mean, just diving into it, I found it fascinating that the thing that was, the fastest to make, the gin, that was, let's turn and burn on this while the other things that require aging can afford to sit there while we're not allowed to be transporting it. We're not really allowed to be making it, but we're not making it if it's sitting there on the shelf. So that's, legally sitting there. And the other, thing I'd picked up on is that it was given alternate uses. So, hey, this whiskey is pharmaceutical, and
100%.
so we're going to let some people continue to do this, and we're going to call it a prescription or a religious ceremonial need. So that was the thing that I thought was fairly fascinating about it. That certain, religions that got the right, this is part of our faith, and will permit you to continue to buy and serve. People started joining those faiths.
I do not know the answer to this, but we always think of Prohibition as being alcohol, like this kind of alcohol, but did it even outlaw beer and wine?
Yeah.
It did, everything.
Yeah, it was.
That's crazy.
Yeah, beer and wine.
I think we might get into a little bit later too, but the one thing that also to the other aspect or element of the Prohibition thing was how crazy it was that you're a distiller, you're sitting on a warehouse full of barrels of product, and it's your property, and the government basically comes in and says, you might own these barrels, but you have no control over them anymore because legally
you can't sell them.
You can't do anything with them, and that's just crazy, right? Like you can it's talk about a loss of property rights. Just fell
well,
asleep,
and that's
just taking
how
it
a
from
lot of the laws we deal with today, especially in the spirits industry, whiskey, like breweries and wineries, they're a little bit more hands off with those guys. But our stuff, it's higher proof, and maybe rightfully so, but it's still a lot of laws on the books from 100 years ago. Yeah. I mean, right around 100 years. So we work off of Code of Federal Regulation Part 19. It's this huge book that, is the guidelines or the rules for distilleries, not breweries and wineries, but, for distilleries. And literally probably 80% of the verbiage in that book says at the discretion of the TTB field agent. So TTB is the Tax and Trade Bureau, which is underneath the ATF. So they have a lot of leeway, in what they say and can do, and we've got good relationships with those guys. But there's a lot of laws and regulations still in the books, from Prohibition time frame.
We we're just ending basically the wonderful celebration of tax month, and so everybody gets to work, the first 4 months of the year in order to pay Uncle Sam. I suspect you've probably calculated how many bottles of liquor you have to sell before you've paid off your attorney for the year.
Yeah. Which attorney?
Your team of attorneys.
Yeah.
So Willie, if the existence of whiskey and gin existing at the same time during that Prohibition era and the roles that those two different products played, as a form of strategic redundancy, how should a modern craft distiller like yours think about redundancy today?
Yeah, I think back to one is none, two is one, and there's a lot of products we make now. Almost 15 years later, 14 years later, whatever it is, that I never thought, it was never in our business plan to make or do, but we just always listen to our people and our fans, our consumers, our clients, and because we were never going to do a vodka, but a lot of people, 30% of Americans drink vodka, and people, we just kind of, that's what's good about our tasting room. We get to listen, direct feedback of what people are wanting. And with our gin, that was in the works. Robin, my late wife, she always liked gin, and we'd come up with the recipe within probably our first 2 years of our gin, and, made several batches and tested it. We always have like our friends do a lot of blind taste tests, and that way we can get honest feedback. And we had a pretty darn good gin recipe, and we just got caught up with trying to keep up with what we were currently making. Our honey moonshine was taken off, our bourbon, so we never really pulled the trigger on the gin. But last year it was pretty impressive for us to finally release our green truck gin, which is pretty cool.
And I will say it's delicious.
Yeah, and gin drinkers like gin.
Yeah.
Sure, they might drink a vodka here and there or a whiskey, but people like what they like. So
Yeah, and Karen's very particular about her gin, and she does like to drink it on the rocks, and so that's a pretty good testimonial that she's sitting here with Willie's Distillery gin in her glass, just with ice, and but I think the interesting thing from a redundancy standpoint for you, I would imagine your ability to implement redundancy exists in the two primary ways that comes to my mind is expansion of product line,
right,
and two is also expanding your market base, who you end up trying to connect with that has the various tastes or interests. Is there anything else that comes into play? I guess
there's quite a
inputs.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit to that. I mean, I think we've got maybe 15 products, bottles. It might even be up to 18. And some of those are just available in the tasting room, our distillery. But it was just giving people kind of what they want and the options. And there was some thought on that. I mean, there's plenty of examples of out there where a distillery makes like one bottle, one product, like a great whiskey, and that's what they do, and that's the only thing they do. And that's cool. And they, it's very easy and streamlined for them to keep making the same thing. The recipe's the same, everything they do, all the marketing. And, but if something happens, if let's say they're making a, awesome bourbon and the bourbon market just tanks, then they're kind of screwed. So we can kind of push and pull and fall back on, another product. So we do quite a bit of that, but it is a lot of work running, making that many products. And we've got a couple others that we want to do over the next couple years. But it takes time, and, sometimes our sales reps or other people, they want it, and sometimes they don't. Like, man, I'm trying to sell these other 8 things, and you're going to make 2 more. And now I've got 10,
Right.
So
it's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about from the input end, as far as like grain suppliers, barrel suppliers, glass suppliers?
Yeah,
like
100%. And I mean, I've always known that, through the military redundancy type stuff. But when it hits you pretty hard up and fast, let's say with a barrel maker, we're going through a certain cooperage, and all of a sudden they can't get you the barrels. You're like, okay, what do we do? I mean, so we've always, almost day one, especially by the first couple of years, we have redundancy, and it's tricky because you make relationships with these people, and but we've always had, 3 or 4 cooperages that we work with, because
Good.
there's been times where that one, COVID was a good example. Depending on what state they were in, Minnesota like shut down cooperages, so our barrel makers, from Minnesota, we couldn't get barrels, whereas the ones in Missouri were like, hey, you can keep working. So that's with glass, the bottles, that's with corks, labels, grains, always have, at least an alternate supplier. So, one little thing happens, because there's a lot to that bottle, the
Right.
yeast, the enzymes, the grains, the recipe, the labels, the cork, the glass, the barrels, if it's barrel aged. And one thing happens, guess what? You can't bottle it. You're not getting it out. So you've got to have redundancy there.
Yeah. I think as an example, representative business, for our purposes, I'm so, it's a hindsight thing. I can't take any credit, because it's just, it fortunately worked out, but I really am just continually find myself amazed and impressed with the nature of the craft distillery business. And the more I learn about what goes into it and how to actually survive longevity, and just so many things working, not necessarily against you, but just really, you gotta really be on your A game. You got to be one hell of a businessman, I think, to really run a successful, long-standing distillery. From what I'm understanding.
And I think it's any business, really. I mean, this is the only business I know, but I've got a lot of friends, and others that are in business, and you'd be surprised. Yes, alcohol is very regulated, more so than a lot of other businesses, but besides that, every business has their challenges. And
True.
I mean, I think almost any business it's gonna be tough to run and manage and grow, successfully.
True. So from a redundancy standpoint, as far as the customer base goes, one of the things about we had mentioned, you had mentioned in a previous show about toying around with the idea of talking about extension of product line, contemplating the whole no alcohol marketplace that seems to be kind of becoming a more popular thing.
Yeah.
And I was curious to bring that up with you today, because Adam actually is a representative of that market base. And so I just thought it'd be kind of interesting to throw that out there and see, like, do you have any specific thoughts on, as a non-drinker? I mean, do you find yourself, like, what are your thoughts on that growth of that component or part of the industry?
Sure.
Is it real? Is it growing? Are you experiencing that? Are you seeing it in your life?
I think it's maybe it's the algorithm on the social media, like that knows, but it's showing me more commercials nonstop of like, this is wine without booze, this is whiskey without. So it feels like it's growing in me. I think it is, though, and I think there's information and statistics that the generation younger is not drinking as much, and whether that's cost or whether that's other things available and legalized relatively lately. But I do think there's a trend towards that. And I think the product is improving leaps and bounds. Like even 8.5 years ago, when I was like, well, it's a non-alcoholic beer or it's a soda water, you had like St. Pauli Girl and Heineken. Like that was it. That was the two NA beers that you could get. Yeah, O'Doul's. Yeah. Oh gosh, O'Doul's. And for me, it just wasn't worth it.
Right.
Like I'm not paying the same amount for none of the fun.
Calories with no flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. So just me seeing that start to grow is actually kind of validating.
Right.
And I can still go hang out with my friends and have something along with them and still enjoy the flavor and participate. So yeah, I think that's really, I actually really love the trend. I'm happy to see it happening.
Yeah, it's getting better and it's evolving in the right direction, because I've seen the non-alcoholic spirits, 10, 12 years now. And sometimes I'd buy some into, a liquor store or something just to try it out. And some of them are pretty good. Some of them are okay, but they're getting a lot better. The non-alcoholic beers have been around for a while and they're getting way better too. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're looking at doing, and we're probably going to start with like an RTD, like a ready to drink, something like in a can, maybe a non-alcoholic, what we call like a mocktail. So I think we could make some pretty good stuff that would taste pretty good. There's 0 alcohol in there, or I think there's like a limit, like it's got to be like 0.05%, below or something like that.
Which is basically kombucha.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you foresee from a growth standpoint, as far as building into additional redundancy, from an operational standpoint, you see going the RTD route, ready to drink market first, if you ever decide to go the non-alcohol route.
Yeah, we're going to do the ready to drink market first, and dabble with that, because cans and aluminum and all that stuff is a little tricky, and some of that stuff we've got to outsource. So we'll see how that works. But that is our plan down the road, is to make non-alcoholic mocktails as well. And one of my ideas, I have like folders and folders of ideas and names. I'm kind of the idea fairy, but that was one of my first ideas, is like, oh, we could do a non-alcoholic gin, and we could call it Virgin. Guess what? Somebody else is already doing that. So anytime
Gotta be first to market.
start to look around, and I was like, well, I knew it wasn't a bad idea. Somebody else is already doing it.
Yeah.
You didn't get to be a virgin on your virgin product.
And if you want a real world example of craftsmanship meeting adaptability, check out Willie's Distillery. That's what building something that lasts actually looks like. And you can use the promo code TREASURE for discounts.
Thanks, honey. So in closing, so whether it's a distillery surviving prohibition or a modern business adapting to new markets, the pattern is the same. Redundancies equals survival, which raises the question, do most people structure their financial life with redundancy or dependence?
Their financial life? Depends on who they are.
Most people. There's always exceptions to the rule, but if you were going to generalize,
if you said most people, dependence,
most people structure, and obviously this is maybe potentially an unfair generalization, but we can get away with it. What do you think, Adam?
In this context, I think what seems like the good idea is probably what the very fewest people are doing.
Explain further on that, please.
Well, it seems like the redundancy, or being diverse and having spreading out different. That would be the wise way to go. And so I'm guessing that I'm not doing that. There's 3 things I know how to do. I'm doing none of them very well, and but I would imagine, as far as the diversity of things, how to build that redundancy, like I know what the term means, but I don't know how to actually do it with my wallet.
Well, as far as what the average person relies on from a financial life standpoint, statistically, do you guys want to venture a guess on where the majority of people put their money into their financial planning?
Probably an IRA or 401k, or maybe savings, or they might buy some bonds or something like that.
Yeah.
Mattress.
Would you agree with that?
Coffee can buried in the back.
Do you have a different selection on that?
No, I think 401k or IRA is probably, if your company is offering it, then it's, that's a thing?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that, because that's a thing that all I have to do is a few pieces of paper, and I'd imagine that's the easiest. There's no barrier of access there. It's
a built-in choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. According to a Federal Reserve report, the most recent one that they have published, but approximately it's 64%, but roughly 2/3 of all non-retirees have either a retirement account, IRA, 401k, or a pension. So, that's I think that's when I saw that statistic, it didn't shock me, but it also
made you cringe
a little bit, just because because we'll get into more of this coming up in the next episodes, but there's it's a little bit of the opposite direction of the redundancy concept that we've been talking about. So anyway, that actually, let me see, where are we going here next? What most people don't consider, are they actually operating inside a system that even allows for control in the first place? That's just a rhetorical question. So be sure to catch episode 2 coming out next, where we'll address that question.
And if you want to start thinking differently about this, join the Treasure community and grab the new Frontier map. It's our welcome gift.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I want to encourage everybody to get their Willie's product today. Please go to williesdistillery.com and use the promo code TREASURE. You can get some discounts on shipping on 3 bottles or more of Willie's products, or 15% off all merchandise. So want to thank you guys for coming in, and we will catch up with you in the next episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Now I gotta run back to Montana. I had my